it's because humans tend to drift. Even things we really enjoy doing, right? I mean, some of us have hobbies, or maybe we enjoy playing a musical instrument, or we like to play golf, or we like to knit or sew or crochet. We all have those things that we like to do, and no one's making us do it, right? We're doing it because we like to do it, and yet we tend to drift away from it unless we're very intentional about scheduling that time to do it. It's just one of those things, and especially in the American mindset, even fun, it's crazy when you think about it. Like, there's entire industries that have risen up for tourism, hotels, adventure packages. You can take cruise ships, all these sorts of things. There's billion-dollar industries for recreation, and yet, as a country, we take far less vacation time off, time to get away and to have fun, even though we have easy ways to do that. I mean, literally, all you have to do is call up a travel agent. They'll book an entire vacation for you. You don't have to plan a thing, right? In fact, one of my friends, he dated a girl for a while who that's what she did. She made travel arrangements for people who wanted to visit Ireland. So they would call her up. They say, we want to go to Ireland. And they would just show up with luggage, and she'd say, okay, here's your itinerary. Here's where you're going to go. You're going to stop in these places. You're going to stay in these hotels and these bed and breakfasts. And when you get back, you're going to have had a great time, I mean, that was her entire job, was planning other people's recreation time. That's a cool job, right? But still, we don't stay focused. We don't even those things that we really love. I remember when I was a kid, my dad loved to go bass fishing. He'd go fishing all the time. And yet, besides going out with some people from church every now and then, I couldn't tell you the last time he just went fishing on his own. The same thing, he went through a phase where he played golf all the time. In fact, in Illinois, they would do a statewide golf tournament. Church of God people from all over the state would come and they'd compete, and that always fell on my birthday weekend. And so Dad would let me skip school and go play golf with all the old ministers in the state. And it was always fun, But again, I don't know the last time he's been golfing, just for fun, Goes with people if they invite him, But he doesn't stay committed to doing that recreational activity. Anyway, we tend to drift from our commitments. It's the same way. I mean, we sign up to do something. It's really, really funny. We're here at the beginning of the school year, and so Elizabeth is being contacted about, we want you to join the PTA. We want you to be part of the Football Boosters Club, and we're going to sign everybody up to work the ticket booth and to bring snacks after the game and to do this and to do that. And she said, well, should I sign up? They're asking everybody to sign up for two things. She said, well, should I sign up for more than that? And I said, no. I said, sign up for two things. I said, here's why. I said, because we know someone's going to bail and we'll jump in and cover it later on. So if you sign up for 4 now, then we'll be covering 5 or 6. You know what I mean? Because humans, we don't stay committed. We don't follow through on a lot of our commitments. When we see that happening, when we feel ourselves drifting, we have to pull ourselves back on course. I mean, if you're driving your car, right now we're having issues with one of our cars. I don't know if it's an alignment or a tire balance issues. We've had it in the shop a couple times. They still can't figure out what's going on. But have you ever driven a car and you feel it drifting and you feel it pulling to one side, and you have to constantly be working to keep yourself on track? And it's the same way with our lives. We have to do that. We have to work hard to keep going on the right track. And it's not always bad intentions, right? We don't intend to mess up. We don't intend to get off course, but it just happens. One example we can think of is a Bible study. Let's say we've decided we're going to have our hour-long Bible study on Wednesday nights. From 7 to 8 p.m., we're going to come in, we're going to study the Word, right? Well, it can very easily bloat. It can very easily turn into something far more than just Bible study. Someone might come up with the idea, Kelly might say, we really enjoy singing on Sunday. What if we opened up our Wednesday night Bible study with a song or two? Well, that's not a bad thing to do, right? So we'll add a song or two. Then the next thing you know, someone says, well, we need to make some announcements because everybody's here, so let's make sure everybody remembers to sign up for the potluck or to sign up for Derby Dinner Playhouse or whatever it is that we've got coming up, so we make sure and we talk about that for 5 or 10 minutes. And then, someone says, well, we've got the coffee out front and we don't get to see each other very much, so why don't we just delay starting for a couple minutes so that we can chat and drink our coffee and that sort of thing. And before you know it, that hour of Bible study that you set aside is now cut down to, 45 minutes, 40 minutes, 30 minutes. Before you know it, the thing that we're gathering for is the Bible study has taken back burner. And so that's why we have to be very careful, very intentional about things. We have a staff meeting here on Tuesday mornings, and one of the things that we've started doing is we have a printed agenda, and we try to stick to that. For the first 15 minutes we're going to talk about this. For the next 10 minutes we're going to talk about that. We never stay with it. Why? We drift. We're like we chase rabbit trails. We get off on things that shouldn't matter or that distract us from the goal, which is to plan and to move forward. So that's why it's so important that we have to work hard to keep ourselves on track, to stay committed. It's crazy sometimes the things that we don't realize have happened. I can't tell you how many people I've called and because as the pastor, when I see that there's people who they've been coming to church and then all of a sudden, they've missed 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll call them up and I'll just say, hey, listen, I wanted you to know we miss you guys, hadn't seen you in a while, wanted to make sure everything was okay. And then people will say, well, I guess, they said, I was just there last week. And then they think about it and they're like, well, you know what? I wasn't there last week or the week before or the week before. And they don't even realize it, right? That they've gotten themselves out of the habit. And when you get yourselves out of the habit, then it becomes hard, all right? It becomes hard to stay on track. So if we're going to maintain focus, if we're going to, focus on our relationship with God, it's going to be costly and it's going to be painful. And what I mean by that is it's going to cost you something, right? We have to check in. We have to look back and evaluate ourselves honestly, right? I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, if you let me see someone's calendar and their checkbook, I can tell you what their priorities are, right? But, if you don't consistently sit down and look at where you're actually spending time, and what you're actually doing, then you're not really sure where you're going to be there. I was reading an article not too long ago, and it was talking about workaholics and how much people feel like they're working. And when you look at people who self-report, it was the number was around 40% said that they work anywhere from 60 to 80 hours a week. If they were self-reporting, I work between 60 and 80 hours a week. When they actually tracked those people, only about 6% of those people were working over 60 hours a week. It's just that their perception of work was that, man, I'm working so hard, I'm working so long, that they felt like, man, I'm working double at what everybody else is. But in reality, they weren't really doing that. And so we have to take time to assess. I've told you guys, I'm a to-do list kind of guy. So every morning I sit down, I make my to-do list. I pick the 3 things that I want to get done today. And you want to know how many days I get all 3 of those things done? Very, very few, right? A lot of them I have to say, okay, well, they only get half a check because I didn't get the whole thing done. I got started on it, but then someone called, or this sprung up, this emergency came up, or whatever. Christy Roberts was posting earlier today about how crazy her day was. They went in for surgery, and then their daughter's bus was stuck in a ditch, and then they had to go back and get something that they left at the house. And their whole day, they had planned it out, right? We're going to send off the kids to school. We're going to go get the surgery on the foot. Then we'll be done in time to pick the kids up. Is that how it played out? No, it's not. And so she had to stay focused. If there was something that was important, she had to pull herself back on track. So it's costly. It takes time to sit down and say, listen, let's be realistic here. How consistent am I in my prayer time, in my devotion time? How often do I read the Bible? How often am I giving towards stuff? How often do I actually serve in some way? How many of my friends do I stay in contact with? But that's something I feel guilty about a lot, because a lot of my friends, just because they don't live here in Louisville, I don't see them very often. And I'll go a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, and then I look, and the last time I called my buddy Ian, it's been like 6 months since I've talked to the guy. And I feel guilty. I feel like, well, I'm a bad friend, right? And I didn't even realize it, right? So you have to constantly check back in. And then the other thing you have to do is, when you do realize that you're drifting, when you do realize that you're getting off course, you're going to have to change something to get back. And so that means sometimes we have to trim the fat a little bit. You know what I mean? When I was doing this study, I was consistently thinking about plants. I was looking at our front yard, and we've got some bushes there in front of the house, and they're growing up, and they're getting to the place where they need to be trimmed back. And I was like, well, I just did that. I just trimmed them back. And then I'm thinking, no, wait a minute, this is August. That was back in March, the last time I trimmed those things. But it feels like it was just yesterday. But if you don't stay on top of it, if you don't constantly prune and trim and pull things back, it gets out of control. The same thing, when we were gone to youth camp this summer, we were gone for 2 weeks to youth camp, and then Elizabeth and Ben, they went down and visited family for a week, and over the course of those 3 weeks, the flower beds got just ridiculously out of control. And if we would have just stayed on top of it, pulling those weeds as they popped up, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But because we allowed it to get out of whack, it took like 3 days of back-breaking labor, and I'm not going to be the fool that claims I did the majority of that. Most of that was Elizabeth. She got down in the dirt and dug most of that out. Flower beds are back to looking good again. But you got to stay on top of things. You got to make sure that you're taking care of what needs to be taken care of. And the thing is, there will always be an emergency. There will always be an excuse or some sort of extenuating circumstance that, well, that's why I didn't follow my diet today. That's why I didn't, spend my time in the Word today. That's why I didn't, actually do what I said I was going to do with my son or my daughter. There's always something that'll pop up. And so that's why we constantly have to be checking and looking at our priorities and making sure our actions line up with the priorities. Sometimes that means we end up having to say no to somebody, and that doesn't feel good, right? I've been listening to a podcast not too long ago, and they've been talking about negotiations. And this guy was saying, man, you can negotiate anything. He tells a story about how he went into the mattress store and they wanted $1,800 for this mattress that his girlfriend wanted, and he said, let me take care of this, and he gives this story about how he got these two stores playing off of each other, and by the time he was done, he was out the door for like $750. Saved over $1,000 and got them to deliver and got them to drag the old one off. He's like, just by negotiating, I was able to do that. And the main way he did that was he made the salespeople uncomfortable, right? And he did that by, there's that social contract. So it's like, well, hey, let's do a little bargaining here. You think you can come off that price a little bit, and it's uncomfortable. And so obviously the salesperson, they want to meet them halfway. Why? Because we all want to be good people. We all want to be nice people. We want people to like us, right? And so sometimes we'll say yes, even though it's really not in our best interest. We do that all the time. And sometimes we have to say no to things, even when they're good things, right? Sometimes for instance, the example that I was talking about earlier with the PTA and that kind of stuff. Hey, that's great. We want parents to be involved in their schools, but sometimes it can be too much. And so sometimes you have to say, hey, I need to scale this back. I would love to help, but I just can't help on that level. I can sign up for one volunteer, but don't make me president of the PTA. So sometimes we have to say no to something, even though it's a good thing, even though it's a worthy thing. There are times my friends, they want to hang out, and they'll say, hey, let's get together this weekend. And I'll tell them, I say, I do have a couple hours open, but I've got a busy day, and it would really be squeezing it. And so I'm just going to say no, because I know my day never turns out exactly like I planned. And if I try to book every minute down to the minute, something's going to run over, and then somebody's going to get disappointed. So I would rather just say, I don't think I can make it, rather than saying, yeah, I'll be there, and then bail on somebody. And so sometimes, even though I would really like to spend that time with my friend, it's better for me just to say, no, I can't do it this time. Let's pick another time, so that I can then fully invest in what's important. And so sometimes you say no to something good so that you can say yes to something better. How many of you guys, when you walk out of the grocery store, sometimes there's people there and they're collecting money for various organizations, Crusade for Children or that kind of stuff, and they're collecting for a charity, and that's a good cause, right? But I don't always give to those things, and I don't feel guilty about it either. Why? Because I give to other organizations. I give to missions projects or to different things, and so it's like I don't feel bad about saying no to this, even though it's a good cause, because I'm giving in some other way to another organization. And that's why we constantly have to check with God, because there's a million good things you can do, right? But there's only so many best things you can do. It's the same way with putting our family over our job. When it comes to work and they ask you to pick up an extra shift, and you want to say yes, right? Because the extra money's nice. You want your boss to like you. But the thing is if they offer you some overtime and you turn them down, they'll get somebody else to do it, right? Anybody that works at your job could probably pick up and do what you're going to do, unless you're just very specialized in your job and you're the only one that knows how to do it. But they can get anyone to come in and replace you. But when it comes to your kid, you're the only one that can be mom or dad, right? And so if you're sacrificing that weekend time, you're sacrificing, and they could get anybody else to do that. But there's nobody else that can come in and replace you to your kid. So that's why it would be good to say yes sometimes, and you would like that. It might advance your career. It might get you some pay raises at your next evaluation or whatever. But sometimes you have to say no to what's good so that you can say yes to what's better. Focus is about making sure that only the best goals are pursued. And what do I mean by best? Well, like I said, you say no to something good so that you can say yes to something better. How do you know what's better? Well, if it's on mission. Well, what's our mission, right? What is our mission? Jesus said the law hangs on two things. That you love the Lord your God with all your heart, you love your neighbor as yourself. Those two things. If you're doing those two things, you're good. What's the other thing? We're given a great commission. We need to be a witness to the world. We need to be sharing the gospel. And so we have to stay focused on that as well. Anything that prevents us from doing those things is not on task. It's not on mission. And you have to think about that. We allow ourselves to get pulled in a million directions. We do. And we have to learn how to say, you know what, that sounds awesome. I would love to do that. I want to support you, but this is what I'm called to do. This is what I need to do. I was listening to a lady not too long ago. She was talking about, she'd called into a radio show, and she was saying, I really feel like I have some things going on emotionally. I need to talk to somebody, and I need to talk to somebody who can listen to me and not judge me and maybe help me process some of these emotions that I'm feeling. She said, but I can't really afford to go to therapy. I can't afford to invest that in myself when my kids need clothes for school or my husband's car's broken down or whatever. She said, I can't afford to spend that money on that when our family has other needs. And I thought the radio host had a really good perspective. He said, listen, if you broke your wrist, would you feel bad about going to the emergency room and paying them to fix your wrist? You wouldn't, right? You'd take care of that. You'd have it bandaged up. You'd have it x-rayed. You'd have them put the cast on it, whatever they need to do to get your wrist back to how it needs to be so that you can live your life, so that you can work your job, so that you can do the things you need to do. And he was telling the lady, he said, these emotional issues that you're having, he said, that's an emotional broken wrist. You need to take care of that so that you can continue to do your job and take care of your family and do the things. And it's the same way just like we have to take care of our physical health and we have to take care of our emotional health, we got to take care of our spiritual health. And you know what? There are some times when we have to say, I need to step back for a minute. I need to take a few minutes to heal. I need to take a few minutes to let God work some things out in me. And so we have to constantly be assessing and seeing when we're not doing well. It's far too easy to just kind of shake it off, right? Here in America, we have this idea that, man, you got to just man up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. All right, anybody ever try to pick themselves up by their bootstraps? That's impossible, right? And yet we tell people to do it all the time. And I'm guilty of it too, right? I remember when Ben was little and he'd fall and scrape his knee or whatever, and of course we'd clean him up and take care of it. But if he continued crying, I'd tell him, I'd be like, are you dying? Okay, if you're not dying, you're good. Go play, And that's not what he needed, right? That's not what he just needed somebody to give him a hug and tell him everything's going to be okay. But, I'm just not that person. That's what Elizabeth's there for, But anyway, the point is like we tell people to just tough it out, get over it, How many times have you heard someone tell somebody, just get over it? And it just doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. You can't just get over it. If you could just get over it, I would have. Sometimes you got to go through a process. And it's weird. It's like we're accepting of it in some areas, right? So if someone came to us and they said, listen, I have a substance abuse problem, we would say, you know what? You need some help with that. You're probably not going to be able to kick that on your own. You're going to need to go to some counseling, get in a 12-step program, go to a rehab, do something to get you some help to get you beyond that. Yet if somebody comes to us and they have a spiritual problem, what do we say? We say, well, just keep praying about it, buddy, and you'll figure it out. No, we have to help people. And the other thing we could do is when we see that someone's struggling, we can do whatever we can to take pressure off of them in other areas so that they can help. Right now we have a family in the church. They're going through some stuff, and I've been trying to reach out to them and just say, listen, is there anything we can do to help? As a congregation, we're your family, and is there anything we can do to help? They won't even return my phone calls. They won't even answer texts. And it just blows my mind. I'm like, look, you're struggling. Your ship's sinking. You're going underwater. I'm offering to help, and you won't even respond, right? And so we have to just stay on mission. We have to focus, and we have to see what's important and realize that you're not going to figure it all out on your own, but we have to remain focused on what's important. It should be a daily discipline for us. That's part of checking in every day, daily confession to the Lord. Every morning I get up and I say, God, forgive me of any sins I might have committed. Ones that I know I did, right? Because sometimes I know I messed up. Lord, forgive me of the sins I don't even realize I did. Forgive me of that time when I brushed somebody off and all they needed was for me to pay a little attention to them or maybe to listen to them or to show the love of Christ to them, and I blew right on by them because I was too busy, I was too caught up in my own world. Forgive me of that. And I know some people, and they say, you Christians, you're crazy. You just beat each other up. And it's not what I'm doing, right? I'm not repenting of my sin because I feel like I'm such a worm and I'm unworthy and God's going to just stamp me out. That's not why I'm doing that. I'm doing that to remind myself I've got to stay focused. I've got to focus on what's important. I've got to be about my Father's business all the time. So that's why we have to constantly be taking up our axe. And that's what Jesus was saying. Look, I mean, the thought of losing one of my hands, I don't want to lose my hand. But if the loss of a hand will get me to heaven, that's more important, right? Right? And Jesus is trying to make that point. Your hand, your foot, your eye, there should be nothing that's too important that you wouldn't be willing to give that up to chase after God. And so we have to be willing to prune away things. There have been many times in my life where I had to prune away something that was not godly. It was not taking me in a direction I needed to go. There were books that I read halfway through, and I closed the book and I said, that's it. That book is not godly. That book is not taking me where I need to go. The same thing with TV shows. There are TV shows on my Netflix queue where I've made it a third of the way through the season or halfway through the season. Or sometimes I've made it 3 seasons into the show. And then I'm like, you know what? I don't know what happened. But for whatever reason, they're just going further and further and further. They're pushing the envelope further and further. Stephanie, we've talked about this before, where it's like, man, I was really enjoying that show. I liked the premise of it, but I realized it's not taking me to places I need to go. I remember a few years ago, I got caught up into the CSI and the Criminal Minds and watching those kind of shows. And if you watch those, please understand, I'm not judging you at all. But I quit watching them because Elizabeth and I were watching them together, and she was like, I just can't handle that darkness anymore. She's like, it's all murder and hatred and people shooting each other and killing. She's like, I just can't I can't live in that place, in that headspace anymore. I can't take any more of it. And so we quit watching some of those shows. And again, if you like them, go for it. It's awesome. I've learned some crazy things from that. In fact, we've got a family in our daycare. The mom is a forensic scientist. And I was like, oh, you're like CSI. She's like, yeah, but I don't get paid as much as they do. She's like, and it's not as glamorous as they make it seem. But anyway, the point is we have to constantly be looking at things, anything that is taking us away from God, further from where we need to be. We have to be willing to cut it off and give that up. Give it up. We think about things when Jesus said, I need anyone who's going to follow after me, they need to pick up their cross and die daily. And, you know, it's become such a Christian saying, right? We just say it. You know, yeah, I'm going to die daily for Jesus. I'm going to take up my cross. That was capital punishment, right? That was the most humiliating way that they could die in his time. So that'd be like saying, you know, someone saying, anyone who's going to follow me has to sit in their electric chair and die every day. Or they need to take up their noose, you know? or you know, it's just, he was trying to paint it in as stark a picture as he could. And it was shocking. You know, it talks about in the Bible how there were many who, when he would say these things, they turned away. They said, this is too hard. I can't do that. This guy's crazy. And they walked away. So we have to constantly be willing to check in on that and maintain focus. So that's just one of those things. We should make it a part of our daily discipline. You know, when you're reading Scripture, when you're praying, every day, just ask God, you know, is there something I'm doing that I shouldn't be doing? Is there something I should be doing that I'm not? You know, is there something I've been avoiding, right? I mean, how many times there's that thing that we really don't want to do it, so we put it off and we put it off and we put it off, and if we just would have dealt with it 3 months ago, it wouldn't have been as big an issue. So we have to constantly ask God, is there anything in my life that's keeping me from the blessings you have for me, that's keeping me from doing the things that you've called me to do, and then be willing, if he shows you something, say, God, you're right, because he knows more than we do. You know, he designed this life. He designed us. He designed our temperaments. He designed our situations that we're in. You know, we were born in this time, in this place for a reason. And so he knows. He's got the instruction manual. All right. So I wanted to open it up to some discussion and just see, you know, what are some things that you have found that cause you to drift from time to time? Does anybody want to share? Is there anything that you know of, or maybe you've struggled with it, maybe you're continuing to struggle with it, but it causes you to get off course from where you think you need to be? I've shared a couple things over tonight about the books and the TV shows, but maybe there's something else that's been keeping you from doing what you know God needs to do. Or if you don't want to admit that you do it, maybe you want to call out your neighbor or something. You know, what's something that causes them to drift? Internet? Okay. In what way would the internet? Okay. All right. Yep. So we've got the internet, waste of time, or getting caught up in pointless arguments, being offended on behalf of somebody else. That one makes no sense to me. Why would I be offended for someone else? If they're not offended, why am I picking up that stuff? You know. Anybody else? Yeah, Stephanie? Right. Carl says, I'll help you with those veggies. Right. Right. Yeah, you get diminishing returns in some aspects. It's like, okay, how many jars of salsa do I actually need, you know, or whatever. But then the other thing, too, is it's like you have to learn how to evaluate what's my time worth, you know. I've tried to. Ben has never had a job. Obviously he'll do odd jobs for people. He'll cut people's grass, or I'll help you move furniture or whatever, and he'll get a little pocket money that way. But he's never really had like an hourly job where he understands, okay, I'm making $7 an hour. But I've tried to help him understand, when you ask me to go buy you this video game or this whatever, a piece of football equipment or whatever, I said, let's break that down, son. If you're making $10 an hour and that video game's $50, you have to work for 5 hours to earn that. Is that video game worth the 5 hours of hard work? Now, maybe it is to you, but you try to help him understand, is this helping me to get where I want to be? Or the other thing you have to do is the lost opportunity. The 2 hours a night that you're spending in the garden, what else could you be doing with that time? Could you be working on your relationship with your kids? Could you be spending a little more time in the Word? Could you be taking care of stuff so that you're not so stressed and tired and worn down? Last night we had a little bit of a dramatic point because I told Ben, I said, we're a week out from school starting, so bedtime's back in effect. And he was like, this is stupid, Dad. It doesn't make sense. I don't need that sleep. If you would just, he even said this to me. He's like, Dad, if you would just leave me alone, I can take care of myself. I said, son, I love you. I said, but we've had this talk before, all right? You know a lot of things. You're a smart kid, but the part of your brain that's a self-regulation, it's not fully developed, so you need to let your mother and I feed into you. Your body doesn't just switch from staying up till 2 a.m. to now getting up at 6 a.m. overnight. You're going to need a few days for your body to adjust. And on top of that, he doesn't get enough sleep anyway, because they say teenagers need like 10 plus hours of sleep a night, and he's not getting anywhere close to that. But anyway, the point is that he needs to learn how to listen to some wisdom and see that we're trying to help him, and sometimes you have to say, that 2 hours that I could spend on Xbox or watching something on Netflix or whatever, it could be better invested. Anybody else have anything else that's caused you to drift over time? Yeah, Miss Kate? Okay. Right. 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 Yeah. Right. And part of that's just understanding your limits. The simple fact is we all have 168 hours for the week. We got 24 hours in a day. You've only got so many, and you got to do the math sometimes and just say, I can't do anymore. If I've got 8 hours of rest and 8 hours of work, I've only got 8 hours left to work with. Well, I can't schedule 10 in that slot of 8. It just doesn't add up, so something's got to give. I know a lot of families that have to set limits with their kids for extracurricular activities. They'll say, listen, one extracurricular activity per kid at any given time. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. And then you feel like, well, I'm shortchanging my kid because if he wants to play or she wants to be in dance or whatever, I want to provide that for her, but sometimes you just can't, you know? And we have to take care of ourselves and understand our limits in every way. And again, checking in on your priorities. You know, has anybody ever heard the analogy of the big rocks? They say, you know, if you take a jar and you put in the water, and then you put in the sand, then you put in the pebbles, then you put in the big rocks, you can't get it all in there, right? But if you put in the big rocks first, and then you let the pebbles fall into the extra spaces, and then you let the sand fall into the extra spaces, and then you let the water fall in, you can get there. But it takes prioritizing and taking those important things, all right? If you're like me, where I've allowed myself to get out of shape, that means a big rock for me needs to be taking care of myself physically, because I've seen where that goes if I don't, and I don't want my life to be like that. The same thing spiritually. You know, if I'm going to be on top of my game, if I'm going to be the man that God's called me to be, that has to be one of my big rocks, is my time with God, my time worshiping, you know, my time investing in my church family. You know, I've had friends before where they offer for me to do something with them, and it's the same time that somebody from church has asked me to do something, and not just because I'm the pastor, but I choose my church family over something else, because for me that's a big rock. You know, this is my family. I've talked to people about that before when they've said, well, I feel called to leave my church over here and come over here, or leave this church family and go over there. And I tell them that doesn't make sense, because your church is your family, right? You know, I'm a baker. God doesn't call me to leave the Baker family and go across town and be a Whitaker or whatever other name it is. You know, He doesn't call me to leave my family. You know, this is my family. You know, and so you invest in your family. So, I mean, why is it so important, you think, that we stay focused? And what are some of the costs that come to us when we drift? Anybody have some thoughts on that? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if you let it stack up, you get to a place where eventually you're overwhelmed, right? I've had that conversation with Ben so many times about his bedroom. Like, if you would just straighten it up. And we'll ask him to clean his room, and he'll go in there and work for 4 hours, and then the next day it's back where it was. And I'm like, dude, you spent 4 hours working. Why would you then trash it again? You know? But whatever. He's 14. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah, and I think it's important too that we recognize that there's seasons to life, right? So, you know, if you're in school, right, and you hit summertime, your season of life has changed. You have a little more free time, right? Because school is out for the summer. You can maybe pick out a part-time job or whatever. You know, I'm thinking back to when I was in high school, and during the summer I would try to make as much money as I could, because I knew that once school started back, I'd have to cut back my hours at work or whatever. You know, if you're a parent, you know, and you've got young kids, your life looks very different from if you've got older kids. You know, we're at a place now where our only child is 14, so he's pretty independent. He can get up and, well, he says he brushes his own teeth, you know, but for the most part, he can take care of himself, right? He can pour his own cereal. And then I look at someone like my sister, who she's on the other end of the spectrum. She's got 3 little ones. You know, she's living a very different kind of life. That's the season of her life. And so there's nothing wrong with recognizing that our seasons change, but we have to make sure that as those seasons change, and as our priorities and as our resources change, we have to make sure that the important things don't get lost in the shuffle. what are some concrete steps? All right, I try to make these Bible studies useful. So let's do some brainstorming here. What are some things that we can do? Some steps we can take to make sure that we keep our first things first. That the real important things, the best things, are the things that get our time, our energy, our money, our opportunity, all of that. What are some things we can do to make sure that we're staying balanced and healthy and focused on what's important? Oh. Learning, okay. What's that? Planning, okay. So, what's that? Prioritize. Okay. Self-discipline. Yeah. Yeah. What's that? Take your meds? Right, yes. If that's something you need to do, then yeah, you should stay on top of that. What about establishing some rhythms and some routines, right? Like just one of the things that we're trying to do for this school year is each night before we go to bed, all three of us, we have our own little laundry basket, and whatever laundry's been done that day, it's in the basket. And so we're like, okay, as we go into this school year, into this season, each night before you go to bed, just put away your laundry, whatever that is, and then put your basket away. So there's not just piles of, it's clean laundry, but it'd be a pile of laundry in our living room. And, it doesn't go there. It goes in the dresser, So, you can just establish some habits and some routines. Discipline, what you were talking about. I told you about my to-do list. Also up in the corner of my little book, I have my habit tracker, and I track, did I pray? Did I read my Bible today? Did I eat a Twinkie? Did I whatever? I track different things. One of them that I have to do is remember, did I balance my checkbook? Did I go to bed on time? I'm trying to track those things, and when I see that little thing, that little reminder up in the corner, it helps me to stop, take a minute to assess where I'm at. Some other things, yeah, Stephanie. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to take some time every now and then and just say, hey, what am I doing? I was reading a book, just finished it last night. It was very good. And this pastor was talking about how, as a pastor, Sunday is a very stressful day for him. He has to preach. And at his church, they did a Saturday night service. They did a 2 Sunday morning services and a Sunday evening service. He's like, so my weekends were not restful. He said, and so then here I am, I'm telling people they need to observe the Sabbath, they need to rest, they need to do these things. He said, and I realized that Sunday could not be my Sabbath because of the nature of my ministry. He said, so my wife and I made a decision. We had to pick another day of the week, and we said, this is our Sabbath day, because God didn't just, suggest that we rest. He commanded that we rest. He said, because I'm a pastor, I can't rest on Sunday. So he said, my Sabbath day became Thursday. He said, I told the church secretary, don't call me on Thursday. I asked the church members, unless, your leg fell off, please don't call me. And he said, I established this rhythm, this routine of having a day where my wife and I could have Sabbath, could rest, could study, could pray, could do whatever. I read another article or a book by Eugene Peterson, and he talked about how he and his wife, they would do their Sabbath on Mondays, again, because Sunday was not a Sabbath day of rest for them. So they would put the kids on the bus, they'd drive out to a nearby state park, and they would not speak to each other for like 4 hours. And they would hike. They would walk. He said sometimes we walked together. Sometimes we took our own paths, but we would meet at a certain place if we got separated, and we would have our picnic lunch. And from that point on, we could talk, but we wanted to create some time where we would have some silence, some time to think and meditate and be alone with God and our thoughts. And so it's so important, God designed us to need rhythms. He designed the world to need rhythms, right? Think about that. When the Israelites went into Israel, into the promised land, he said, look, you need to give every 7 years, allow that field to lay fallow. Why did he do that? So that it could regenerate and replenish, and that's why they do crop rotations and that kind of stuff now, because if you just consistently go back and drill and drill and drill and plant and seed and plant and harvest and plant and harvest and plant and harvest in the same spot again, you eventually leach everything good out of the soil and there's nothing left to get. It's the same way in our lives. Well, I think we've come up with some pretty good things. How many of us actually do take some time to plan? Any of us? Do we? All right, Sam, you're a planner? Do you plan out your day, plan out your week, or? Well, basically, I plan out my day, and I just pray it goes away. Right, but so each morning you kind of try to figure out what you're doing for the day.
Every morning I get up, everybody's up. And I get my coffee, and I sit down and I read my Bible every day. I read 7 pages every day.
Okay.
Then I'll go on and say, well, nobody did the dishes, so finish the dishes. Vacuum needs done. I do that. They're late sleepers. That's all I can say.
Right.
And I just like, what else? Then I think to myself, what do I need to do? What do I need from the store? I need this or I need that, or do I need to get supplies, and etc. That's about how my day goes.
Okay.
In the morning, I just try to, take my shower, shave, read my Bible, drink my coffee, relax, talk to the Lord.
So it sounds like you're doing several of the things. You've got a routine, you've got a habit. You take time to plan and to prioritize, what do I need to do today? And it sounds like you're staying on top of the little stuff before it becomes a big problem. So you've incorporated those systems into your life, and it helps you keep yourself prioritized and on track. That's good. That's good. Okay, so time management. Yeah, I think we all do that, because I think we all have skewed senses of time, right? We feel like, I can get this done in 5 minutes, especially any procrastinators and fellow procrastinators in here. I want to throw myself in that book, right? I feel like, I can put this off because I'll get it done in 30 minutes, right? So I can wait till 30 minutes before to get started. No, that ain't how it works, right? Wouldn't it be much better if I just did it then, and then, hey, I wouldn't have to stress out the rest of that time? I'm telling you, I'm the worst at it. All right. I have started imposing artificial deadlines on myself. If something's not due till Friday, I'll say it's got to be done on Tuesday, which means I still don't get it done till Thursday. But at least it was done before Friday, right? All right. Okay. Well, we're coming to the 8 o'clock time. I feel like we've had some good discussion. I hope this has got your wheels turning and help you maybe evaluate some of your own systems and your habits and routines, and maybe we can build some stuff in, and so that we can constantly be checking in with God and making sure that we're focusing on what's important. Let's pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Father God, thank you for this time that we got to spend together. Lord, the study of your word and the time that we got to have some discussion. Lord God, I pray that you would help this to be fruitful time. Lord, the things we've talked about tonight, Lord, let us not just acknowledge their wisdom in our heads, but let us get them into our heart, Lord, to make some changes, to tweak some things, Lord, so that we can stay focused on what's important. Lord, you've put us here in Louisville, Kentucky in 2018 because you have something that you want us to do in the here and the now. And so, Lord God, we want to remove any barriers that would keep us from doing what you've called us to do. Lord, and help us to stay focused, Lord, to keep our eyes on the prize, Lord, to run with faith, Lord, and to pursue you with every breath and with every day. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right. God bless. Have a good evening. We'll see you all on Sunday.